A 6-year-old boy stands barefoot in the darkness, tears streaming down his face. He hasn't spoken a single word in 2 years, not since watching his mother die. But tonight, as the only person who understood him prepares to leave forever, his lips part. One desperate word shatters the silence that imprisoned him. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. You're fired. The words came out cold and final, like a judge delivering a sentence. Silas Harding didn't even look up from his laptop as he said it. The young woman standing in his home office, Miss Richardson, the 8th nanny in 6 months, stood frozen, with her hands clasped in front of her expensive blazer. She'd lasted exactly 11 days. "But Mr. Harding, I was just trying to," she started, her voice shaking. "I don't pay you to try," Silas interrupted, finally lifting his gray eyes to meet hers. "I pay you to succeed. My son needs consistency, structure, professional care. What he doesn't need is someone who gives up the moment things get difficult. Felix hasn't spoken in 2 years, Miss Richardson. Did you really think he'd suddenly start talking to you after a week and a half?" The nanny's face flushed red. "I was following all the protocols you outlined. I have a degree in child development. Clearly it's not enough. James will show you out and process your severance. Good luck in your future endeavors." Silas returned to his screen, dismissing her completely. The woman left without another word, her heels clicking sharply down the marble hallway. When the front door finally closed, James Whitmore, Silas's assistant, and the only staff member who'd survived more than a year in the household, appeared in the doorway. "Sir," he said carefully, "that's the 8th nanny this year. I'm aware, James." "Then perhaps the problem isn't the nannies." Silas's jaw tightened. He closed the laptop slowly, deliberately. "The problem is that none of them understand what my son needs. They come in with their degrees and their theories and their gentle voices, thinking they can fix him like he's a broken toy. They last a week, maybe 2, before they're tiptoeing around him like he's made of glass or worse, treating him like he's mentally deficient. My son is not broken, James. He's traumatized, and there's a difference. I understand that, sir. But perhaps Felix needs someone less clinical. Someone who won't approach him as a project to be solved." Silas stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the manicured gardens. "Do you have someone in mind?" "Actually, I do. The new housekeeping candidate arriving this afternoon, Imani Brooks. She has excellent references, but more importantly, she has a background in working with children. She used to be a teacher's aide before she needed more flexible work." Silas turned, eyebrow raised. "A teacher's aide? And now she's applying to clean houses?" James shifted uncomfortably. "Life happens, sir. Sometimes people need to rebuild. You of all people should understand that." The comment landed exactly as James intended. Silas felt the familiar tightness in his chest. "Fine. But she's here for housekeeping only. I'll handle finding the next nanny myself." "Of course, sir." James checked his watch. "She should be arriving in about 20 minutes. Try not to fire her before she's unpacked her cleaning supplies." Silas almost smiled. Almost. 23 minutes later, Imani Brooks stood in the grand foyer of the Harding mansion, trying very hard not to look as intimidated as she felt. She'd grown up in modest circumstances, worked her way through community college while holding down 2 jobs, and thought she'd seen wealth before. She'd been wrong. This wasn't just wealth. This was dynasty-level money, the kind that came with staff and security gates and art in the hallways that probably cost more than her mother's house. "Miss Brooks?" James appeared from a side hallway, professional and kind in a way that immediately put her at ease. "Welcome. I'm James Whitmore, Mr. Harding's personal assistant." "Thank you for having me," Imani said, shaking his hand firmly. Her mother had taught her that a good handshake told people you weren't afraid of hard work. James had a warm smile that reached his eyes, making him seem more approachable than she'd expected in a house this formal and intimidating. "Let me show you around and explain the household routine. The estate has 3 floors, 12 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, a chef's kitchen, library, home gym, and pool house. Mr. Harding is very particular about his spaces. Everything has a place and should be returned to that place. Imani nodded, pulling out a small notebook from her bag. I understand. Any areas that are off limits? James smiled approvingly at the notebook. Mr. Harding's office when he's working, and Master Felix's room. You'll clean it weekly, but only when the boy is at therapy or school. Mr. Harding is very protective of his son's space. Of course. Imani wrote this down, then looked up. I read in the job posting that there's a child in the home. Is there anything specific I should know? James's expression softened. Felix is 6 years old. He's nonverbal. Has been for 2 years since his mother passed away. He's not dangerous or difficult, just quiet. Very quiet. He has therapists, specialists, nannies, though they don't tend to last long. Your role is purely housekeeping, but you may encounter him. If you do, just give him space. Don't try to engage or fix him. A lot of people try to fix him. Imani felt a pang in her chest. She knew about trauma, about children who retreated into themselves when the world became too painful. I understand. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is just let people be. Exactly. James looked at her with something like relief. I think you'll do well here, Miss Brooks. The tour continued through rooms that looked like they belonged in magazines. Imani made mental notes about the antique furniture that would need special care, the hardwood floors that couldn't tolerate certain cleaners, the windows that were probably cleaned weekly to maintain their crystal clarity. They were passing the grand staircase when she heard it, a soft shuffling sound from above. She glanced up and froze. At the top of the stairs, partially hidden behind the railing, was a small figure, a little boy with dark curly hair and enormous brown eyes that seemed too old for his face. He wore pajamas even though it was 3 p.m, and he was clutching something, a stuffed elephant, worn and faded from years of love. Felix, James said gently, this is Miss Brooks. She's going to be helping around the house. The boy didn't respond, didn't even blink. He just stared at Imani with those haunting eyes, and she felt her heart crack a little. Without thinking, Imani raised her hand in a small wave. She didn't smile, didn't try to make her voice cheerful or talk to him like he was a baby. She just waved, a simple gesture of acknowledgement that said, I see you, without demanding anything in return. For a long moment, Felix stared at her. Then, so subtle she almost missed it. His fingers twitched. Not quite a wave back, but not quite nothing either. Miss Brooks, came a sharp voice from behind them. Imani turned to find a tall man striding down the hallway. Silas Harding in person was even more intimidating than in pictures. 6'2", broad-shouldered, with perfectly styled dark blonde hair that was just starting to show gray at the temples. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, expensive dark slacks, and an expression that could freeze lava. Mr. Harding, Imani said, extending her hand professionally. It's a pleasure to meet you. Silas barely glanced at her hand before turning to James. I thought we agreed housekeeping staff wouldn't interact with my son. We agreed she wouldn't be assigned to care for him, James corrected calmly. Felix came downstairs on his own. Miss Brooks was simply being polite. Silas's eyes, a cold gray that matched the Seattle sky, finally focused on Imani. Let me be clear about something, Miss Brooks. You're here to maintain my home. Nothing more. My son has trained professionals who handle his care and development. I don't need housekeeping staff attempting amateur psychology or, his gaze flicked to the cross at her neck, missionary work. Imani felt her spine straighten. I understand perfectly, Mr. Harding. I'm here to clean your home to your standards and collect a paycheck to support my family. I have no interest in overstepping boundaries or playing therapist. I was simply being courteous to a child I encountered in the hallway. Is courtesy a problem in this household? Or should I take notes on the preferred level of coldness? James made a small choking sound. Silas's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in his icy composure. For a moment, the silence stretched so thin, Imani thought she might have just talked herself out of a job she desperately needed. Then Silas's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but not quite the scowl either. James, I see what you meant about her being different. Show Miss Brooks to the staff quarters and get her started on the second floor guest rooms. We're hosting a business dinner next week and they need to be perfect. Of course, sir. James was definitely trying not to smile now. As Silas turned to leave, Imani couldn't help herself. Mr. Harding? He paused, looking back with barely contained impatience. Yes. Your son is still on the stairs. Might want to check on him before you disappear back into your office. The temperature in the hallway dropped about 20 degrees. Silas's jaw clenched, and for a moment Imani thought she'd finally pushed too far. But then he looked up at the staircase, where Felix had indeed remained, still watching them with those enormous eyes. Something flickered across Silas's face, something raw and painful that was gone as quickly as it appeared. Thank you for your concern, he said tightly, but I'm well aware of my son's location at all times. He walked to the stairs and climbed them with measured steps. When he reached Felix, he didn't try to pick the boy up or force conversation. He simply stood beside him, a hand resting gently on his son's shoulder, and together they walked down the upstairs hallway and out of sight. See? James said quietly beside her. He does love the boy. He just doesn't know how to show it anymore. Imani watched until they disappeared. That's the saddest thing I've heard all day. The first week passed in a blur of work. Imani learned the rhythms of the Harding household quickly. Silas left for his office downtown at 7 every morning, returning around 6 unless he had evening meetings. Felix had therapists who came and went on a precise schedule: occupational therapy on Mondays and Wednesdays, speech therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and play therapy on Fridays. The current nanny, a stern Danish woman named Miss Johansson, who'd started 3 days before Imani, maintained Felix's routine with military precision. Imani saw Felix often during that week, always from a distance. She'd be dusting the library when he'd walk past with Miss Johansson, or vacuuming the hallway when he returned from therapy. He never made eye contact with anyone, except occasionally, when he thought no one was watching. He'd glance at Imani. Just quick looks, there and gone. But she noticed them every time. She noticed other things too. Felix never played with the expensive toys that filled his playroom. He carried the worn elephant everywhere, but he also collected small stones from the garden, smooth pebbles that he'd arrange in careful patterns on his windowsill. He didn't eat the organic, nutritionist-approved meals Miss Johansson served. He just pushed them around his plate, until enough time had passed that he wouldn't get in trouble. And at night, Imani could hear him sometimes. Her quarters were in the converted carriage house behind the main estate, but on quiet nights when she left her window open, she could hear crying drifting from Felix's second-floor bedroom. Soft, broken sounds that no 6-year-old should be making. It's none of your business, she told herself firmly on the 5th night. You're the housekeeper. You clean. You collect your paycheck. You mind your business. But she'd been a teacher's aide for 4 years. She'd worked with children who were hurting, children who needed someone to see past their behaviors to the pain underneath. And every instinct she had was screaming that Felix didn't need more structure or more therapy or more professional interventions. He needed someone to just be with him. No agenda, no fixing, just presence. On Friday afternoon, everything changed. Imani was in the garden, taking advantage of the rare Seattle sunshine to beat the dust out of some decorative pillows. She'd set up her workstation near the rose garden, far enough from the house that she wouldn't disturb anyone but close enough to hear if James needed her. She was so focused on her work, humming softly to herself, that she didn't notice the small figure approaching until he was standing right beside her. Felix. Imani's heart jumped, but she kept her movements calm and slow as she turned to face him. The little boy stood there in his perpetual pajamas, clutching his elephant, staring at her with those enormous eyes. Miss Johansson was nowhere in sight. "Hi, Felix," Imani said softly, setting down the pillow beater. "Are you supposed to be out here?" He didn't answer, of course. He just watched her. She glanced toward the house, wondering if she should call for someone, but something stopped her. He'd come to her deliberately. For the first time since she'd arrived, Felix had sought out another person's company. That had to mean something. Imani sat down on the grass, making herself smaller, less threatening. She patted the ground beside her. "You can sit if you want. No pressure." Felix hesitated. She could see him weighing his options, the instinct to retreat warring with something else. Curiosity, maybe, or loneliness so deep it overrode his fear. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to sit about 2 feet away from her. They sat in silence for a long moment. Imani went back to shaking out the pillows, not staring at him, not demanding conversation or eye contact, just letting him be near her without expectations. The afternoon sun was warm on her shoulders, and birds chirped in the nearby trees. It was one of those perfect Seattle days when the rain held off and everything felt possible. She started humming again, an old gospel song her grandmother used to sing, "His eye is on the sparrow," letting the familiar melody flow naturally without thinking about it. After several minutes, Felix shifted closer. Not much, just a few inches, but enough that Imani noticed. She kept humming, kept working, not acknowledging the movement, but feeling a spark of hope in her chest. Another few minutes passed. This time, Felix moved close enough that his shoulder was almost touching hers. Imani's throat tightened with emotion, but she didn't react outwardly. Instead, she reached for another pillow, and as she did, she noticed Felix was looking at the small stones scattered near the rose bushes. "Do you like rocks?" she asked conversationally, not looking at him directly. "I used to collect them when I was little. My grandma said every stone had a story, that if you held one long enough and stayed real quiet, you could hear what it wanted to tell you." Felix's head turned slightly toward her. "I know," she continued, gently beating the pillow. "It sounds silly, but she was serious about it. She had this whole collection, rocks from every place she'd ever been. She called them her memory stones. Said they held all the good times so she could touch them whenever she was feeling sad." Imani set down the pillow and reached for one of the smooth stones near her foot. "Like this one. See how it's got that little sparkle in it? That means it's been in the river a long time, being tumbled around by the water until all the rough edges wore away. That's kind of like people, don't you think? Sometimes life tumbles us around until we're smooth, but we've still got that sparkle inside." She felt more than saw Felix lean closer to look at the stone. On impulse, Imani held it out to him. "You want it? For your collection?" Felix stared at the stone, then at her face, then back at the stone. Slowly, so slowly, he reached out and took it from her palm. His fingers were small and careful, and when he pulled the stone close to examine it, Imani saw something astonishing. Felix smiled. It was tiny, barely a curve of his lips, but it was real and genuine, and absolutely heartbreaking in its rarity. Imani felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. "Pretty cool, right? Maybe we can find some more sometime if you want. If your dad says it's okay, I mean." The mention of Silas made Felix's smile disappear, but he didn't look upset, just thoughtful. He clutched the stone in one hand, his elephant in the other, and for a moment Imani thought he might actually try to speak. His mouth opened slightly, like he was testing the feeling of it. But then a sharp voice cut through the garden. "Felix, there you are." Miss Johansson came striding across the lawn, her face flushed with anger and fear. "I've been looking everywhere for you. You know you're not allowed to wander off. You frightened me half to death." Felix immediately shrank into himself, the shutters coming down over his eyes. He clutched both the stone and the elephant to his chest, like they might protect him. "I'm sorry," Imani said, standing quickly. "He came to find me. I should have walked him back immediately. I wasn't thinking." Miss Johansson's eyes were cold. "No, you weren't." She grabbed Felix's hand, not roughly, but not gently either. "Come along, Felix. It's time for your vitamins and reading hour. We've already lost 20 minutes of our schedule." As she led Felix away, the little boy looked back over his shoulder at Imani. His expression was pleading, desperate, and Imani felt something in her chest crack wide open. That night after dinner, Imani found James in the kitchen. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." James gestured to the seat across from him. "What's on your mind?" "How long has Miss Johansson been with Felix?" 3 weeks. She's the longest-lasting nanny since Miss Martinez quit in August. Why?" Imani chose her words carefully. She doesn't seem very warm with him. She's professional, James said diplomatically. Mr. Harding values professionalism. Does he value his son being miserable? The words came out sharper than she'd intended. James set down his tea. Be careful, Miss Brooks. I like you, and I think you genuinely care about that boy. But questioning the childcare choices isn't your place, and Mr. Harding won't take kindly to it. I know, Imani said. But James, that child came and sat with me in the garden today. He let me talk to him. He even smiled. When's the last time you saw Felix smile? James was quiet for a long moment. I can't remember, he admitted finally. That's the problem, isn't it? He's drowning in structure and therapy and professional care, but nobody's giving him what he actually needs. And what's that? To feel safe. To feel seen. To know that someone understands he's in pain and isn't trying to fix it, just acknowledges it. Imani leaned forward. I'm not saying I should be his nanny. I'm not qualified, and I know Mr. Harding would never allow it anyway. But maybe I could just spend a little time with him? Nothing official, just sitting with him sometimes. James studied her face. Why do you care this much? You barely know him. Because I see him, Imani said simply. And I think he sees me too. Something about that recognition matters to him, and I can't just ignore that. The problem is, Mr. Harding has very specific ideas about who should interact with his son. If he finds out housekeeping staff is forming an attachment to Felix, he'll see it as undermining his authority. So I'm supposed to just pretend that little boy isn't suffering. I agree with you. But it's not my decision. James picked up his tablet. My advice? Keep your head down, do your job, and don't get attached. This household has already seen too much heartbreak. But Imani couldn't keep her distance. Over the next few days, she found herself timing her work to coincide with Felix's outdoor hours. She never approached him directly, never tried to force interaction. She just made sure he could see her, a friendly presence that expected nothing from him. And Felix noticed. She caught him watching her when Miss Johansson wasn't looking. Once, when she was watering the hallway plants, he walked past and deliberately dropped one of his collected stones near her feet. When she picked it up and held it out to him, he shook his head and kept walking, leaving it for her. It was a gift. She kept it in her pocket. On Wednesday evening, things came to a head. Imani was in the library, dusting the high shelves, when she heard raised voices from the study down the hall. I'm telling you, Mr. Harding, that woman is interfering with Felix's routine, Miss Johansson said. The child is fixated on her. He asked for her today. Well, not verbally, of course, but he kept trying to go to the garden where she works. It's disrupting his therapy. Imani froze, her heart sinking. She's the housekeeper, Silas said, his voice tight. She cleans. How exactly is she interfering? She speaks to him. Sits with him. Today I caught her showing him some ridiculous rocks and telling him stories. It's completely inappropriate. She has no training, no understanding of his condition. For all we know, she's undoing months of professional work. There was a long silence. Then Silas said in a voice like ice, Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Miss Johansson. I'll handle it. I trust you will. And Mr. Harding? I want it noted that I'm concerned about the child's attachment to inappropriate figures. If this continues, I may have to reconsider my position here. I understand. The study door opened and Miss Johansson swept out, her face composed but her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She saw Imani in the library doorway, and her expression turned smug. Some people need to remember their place. Then she was gone, leaving Imani standing there with her heart pounding. She should go back to her quarters, pretend she hadn't heard anything. But she couldn't. Not when Felix's entire world seemed to be controlled by people who didn't understand him. Before she could talk herself out of it, Imani walked to the study and knocked softly. Mr. Harding? There was a pause. She could hear movement inside, could picture him standing there deciding whether to answer or pretend he hadn't heard. Then, come in. Silas was standing by the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. The study was dark except for a single desk lamp casting long shadows. Outside the window, she could see the gardens where she'd sat with Felix just hours ago, though it felt like a lifetime had passed since then. Whatever you're about to say, Miss Brooks, I suggest you reconsider. I need this job, Imani said, stepping inside but staying near the door. I really need this job. My mother has medical bills I'm helping to cover, and work hasn't been easy to find. So I know I should keep my mouth shut and just do what I'm told. She took a breath. But I can't watch that little boy suffer and stay silent. Silas turned, and the look on his face was dangerous. Suffer? My son has the best care money can buy. He has therapists, specialists, a nanny with impeccable credentials. He attends the finest school for children with special needs. Exactly what part of that constitutes suffering? The part where none of it is working. The words hung in the air like a bomb. Silas's eyes went cold. When's the last time you saw Felix happy? Not compliant, not going through his routines, but actually happy. When's the last time he smiled, or played with something because he wanted to, or showed any sign that he's a 6-year-old boy and not just a project to be managed? You have no idea what you're talking about. I know what I saw. I saw a child who's been so professionalized and therapized and structured that there's no room left for him to just be. He's not allowed to be messy or spontaneous or sad about losing his mother because everyone's so busy trying to fix him that nobody's letting him grieve. Silas crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping close enough that Imani had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You are a housekeeper. You dust my furniture and wash my floors. You do not get to stand in my home and tell me how to raise my son. You don't know what happened to him. You don't know what he went through, what we both went through. And you certainly don't get to judge how I'm trying to help him. You're right, Imani said, holding his gaze. I don't know what happened. But I know what I see now. A little boy who gave me a rock because it was the only way he could say thank you for seeing him as a person instead of a problem. A little boy who hasn't smiled in so long that when he finally did, it nearly broke my heart. Silas's jaw worked. Get out. Mr. Harding, please, just listen. Get out of my study. Get out of my house. You're fired, Miss Brooks. Pack your things and be gone by morning. The words hit like a physical blow. Imani felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Fine. I'll be gone by morning. But before I go, can I ask you one question? Silas said nothing, but he didn't order her out again. Why did you have 8 nannies in 6 months? Professional, credentialed, experienced nannies. Why did every single one of them fail? What's the common factor here, Mr. Harding? Because from where I'm standing, it's not them. It's not Felix either. It's you. You're so terrified of failing your son the way you think you failed his mother that you've built a fortress around him. You've made sure every interaction is controlled and professional and safe. But Felix doesn't need safe. He needs real. He needs someone to sit with him in the mess and not try to clean it up. The silence that followed was deafening. Silas stared at her, his face pale, and for a moment, Imani thought he might actually hit her. Then he turned away. I'll have James prepare your severance in the morning. Imani nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She turned to leave, her heart breaking not for herself, but for the little boy upstairs who'd finally started to trust someone. She made it to the door before Silas spoke again. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. His mother died in a car accident. Felix was in the back seat. He watched her die and couldn't do anything to help her. The last thing she said to him was that she loved him, that everything would be okay. Then she closed her eyes and never opened them again. Felix hasn't spoken a single word since that night. Not to me, not to therapists, not to anyone. So forgive me if I'm doing everything in my power to get my son back, even if my methods don't meet with your approval. Imani's hand was on the doorframe, gripping it for support. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry that happened to you both. Good night, Miss Brooks. She left, closing the door softly behind her. The walk back to her quarters felt longer than usual. She packed her few belongings mechanically, her mind replaying the conversation over and over. She'd overstepped. She'd known it was coming and she'd done it anyway. Imani was folding her last shirt when she heard a sound outside her door. A soft shuffling, like small feet on gravel. Then a pause, as if someone was gathering courage. Her heart began to pound even before she knew why. Something about that sound, that hesitant shuffle, made her freeze in place. She opened the door and gasped. Felix stood there in his pajamas and bare feet, his elephant tucked under one arm. His eyes were red and swollen from crying, his cheeks still wet with tears. The night air was cold, and she could see goosebumps on his small arms. How long had he been standing out here working up the courage to knock? He was holding something out to her, a smooth stone, the prettiest one from his collection, with veins of gold running through the gray like captured sunlight. "Oh, sweetheart," Imani breathed, dropping to her knees so she was at eye level with him. "You shouldn't be out here. It's cold and your dad." Felix pressed the stone into her hand. Then, for the first time, he looked directly into her eyes with intention, with purpose. His mouth opened. His whole body was shaking with the effort of what he was about to do. And then Felix spoke. "Don't," he said, the word rough and broken from disuse but absolutely clear. "Don't go." The world stopped. Imani couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Felix had spoken. After 2 years of silence, he'd found his voice, and he'd used it for her. "Please," Felix whispered, and now tears were streaming down his face. "Please stay." Imani pulled him into her arms, holding him as he cried, as 2 years of grief and fear and loneliness poured out of him. She was crying too, rocking him gently, whispering that it was okay, that she heard him, that she understood. She didn't know how long they sat there. It could have been minutes or hours. All she knew was that this broken little boy had finally found his voice, and then another voice, sharp with shock, cut through the night. "Felix?" Imani looked up to find Silas standing 10 feet away, his face white as chalk, staring at his son with an expression of such raw hope and terror that it hurt to witness. Felix pulled back from Imani and turned to his father. "Don't," he said again, his voice stronger now. "Don't make her leave, Daddy. Please." Silas took a step forward, then another, moving like a man in a dream. His eyes were locked on Felix, drinking in the sound of his son's voice like he'd been dying of thirst. "Felix," he breathed. "You're talking. You're actually talking." "Stay," Felix said, looking between his father and Imani. "Make Imani stay." Silas Harding had built empires. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, had stared down hostile boardrooms, and come out victorious, had maintained perfect control through the worst tragedy of his life. But standing there in the darkness, hearing his son's voice for the first time in 2 years, all that control shattered. His knees buckled, and he caught himself against a nearby tree, his breath coming in gasps that bordered on sobs. "Felix. Felix, say it again. Please, son, say something else." Felix looked at Imani as if asking permission. She gave him the smallest nod, her hand still holding his. "I want," Felix said slowly, carefully forming each word like he was remembering how his mouth worked. "I want Imani to stay. She's my friend." The word friend broke something in Silas. He covered his face with his hands, and his shoulders shook. For a long moment, the only sound was the Seattle night, rain starting to fall in that gentle mist that was more feeling than weather, and Silas Harding crying like a man who'd been holding back an ocean for 2 years. "Daddy?" Felix's voice was small, uncertain. "Are you mad?" "No." The word came out choked. "No, son. I'm not mad. God, I'm so happy to hear your voice. I've missed it so much." Silas dropped to his knees right there on the gravel path, not caring about his expensive slacks or his dignity. He opened his arms, and Felix ran to him. Silas caught his son and held him like he'd never let go, burying his face in Felix's hair and just breathing him in. "I love you," Silas whispered. "I love you so much, Felix. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't know how to help you. You were trying to fix me. Felix said simply, his voice muffled against his father's chest. But I wasn't broken. I was just sad. The truth of it hit Silas like a physical blow. His 6-year-old son had just articulated what a dozen therapists and specialists had somehow missed, or what Silas had been too afraid to hear. "You're right," Silas said, pulling back to look at Felix's face. "You're absolutely right. I was so scared of losing you too that I made everything worse, didn't I?" Felix nodded seriously. "Miss Johansson is mean. She doesn't like my rocks." Silas let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Then Miss Johansson is fired. As of right now." Felix's eyes widened. "Really? Really? From now on, things are going to be different. I'm going to listen better. I'm going to trust you more. And I'm going to—" He glanced up at Imani, who was still sitting on the carriage house steps, tears streaming down her face. "I'm going to make some serious apologies to people who were right when I was too stubborn to see it." "Please stay," Silas said to Imani. She stood slowly, wiping her eyes. "Mr. Harding, I should go inside and let you two talk." "No." Silas's voice was firm but not cold. "Please stay. I owe you an apology, Miss Brooks. More than one, actually." She waited, and Silas realized he was still kneeling on the ground holding his son. He stood, keeping Felix's hand in his, and walked closer to Imani. "Everything you said tonight was true. I was so terrified of failing Felix that I turned his care into a military operation. Structure, routine, professional distance. I thought if I could just find the right expert, the right therapy, the right approach, I could bring him back. But you saw what I couldn't, that he didn't need to be brought back. He needed to be met where he was." Imani's voice was gentle. "You were doing your best with unbearable grief. That's not something to apologize for." Silas shook his head. "I fired you for caring about my son, for seeing him as a person instead of a problem. That's exactly the thing I should apologize for." He took a breath. "Miss Brooks, Imani, I'm asking you to reconsider. Not just staying on as housekeeping staff, but would you consider a position as Felix's companion? Not a nanny, not a therapist. Just someone who spends time with him. Someone he trusts." Felix tugged on Silas's hand. "Say yes. Please say yes. I'll teach you about all my rocks." Imani looked between father and son, these two people who'd somehow become tangled up in her heart in just a week. "I need to know something first. Are you offering me this position because you genuinely believe it's what Felix needs, or because you feel obligated after what happened tonight? Because I won't stay if this is charity or guilt." Silas met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd met him, there was no ice in his gaze, just raw honesty. "I'm offering because in 1 week, you did what 2 years of professionals couldn't. You saw my son, not his trauma, not his silence, not his symptoms. You saw Felix, the actual child underneath all of that. And he responded to you in ways I'd given up hoping for. So no, this isn't charity. This is me finally being smart enough to recognize that credentials come in many forms, and the most important credential is a damn good heart." "Well," Imani said, a smile breaking through her tears, "when you put it like that, how can I say no?" Felix whooped, an actual joyful sound that made Silas's breath catch. Imani laughed and found herself pulled into a hug by the little boy. "Come on," Silas said after a moment, his voice rough. "Let's get inside before we all catch pneumonia." It's past Felix's bedtime by about 3 hours. As they walked back to the main house, Felix between them holding both their hands, Imani caught Silas looking at their joined hands with an expression she couldn't quite read. Later she'd realize it was wonder. The simple wonder of seeing his son reach out to touch someone voluntarily. The night ended with hot chocolate because Felix requested it. They sat in the kitchen while Felix told them about every single rock in his collection, his voice gaining strength and confidence with each sentence. Imani listened with genuine interest, asking questions. Silas just watched, memorizing the sound of his son's voice. When Felix finally fell asleep in his chair, Silas carried him upstairs. Imani followed. At Felix's bedroom door, Silas paused. "Will you help me get him into bed? I think if he wakes up and you're not here, he might panic." Of course. They worked together in the dim light, Silas removing Felix's shoes while Imani pulled back the covers. They tucked him in carefully, and Felix stirred just enough to mumble something about sparkly rocks before settling back. For a moment, they both just stood there looking at him. "He looks peaceful," Imani whispered. "First time in 2 years." They stepped out into the hallway. The silence was heavy with things unsaid. "Thank you," Silas said quietly. "For everything. For seeing what I couldn't. For being brave enough to call me out. For giving my son his voice back. I didn't give him his voice back. He always had it. I just made it safe enough for him to use it." Silas studied her face, really looked at her for the first time. "How did you know? How did you know what Felix needed?" Imani explained about the little girl in her class who'd stopped speaking after her father went to prison. One day, she whispered the name of the color she wanted. Blue. Just that one word. It took 6 more months before she'd speak regularly, but that first word came because someone had finally let her be silent without trying to fix it. "I wish I'd known that 2 years ago. You were doing what you thought was right. But now you know. Now you can do better." "Now I can do better," Silas repeated. He looked at her. "Starting with working conditions. If you're going to be Felix's companion, you'll need a proper salary. And quarters in the main house, closer to Felix's room. And input on his schedule, his therapy, all of it. You'll be part of his care team. I appreciate that, but I don't have training or credentials. You have something better. You have his trust. And after watching 8 credentialed nannies fail, I'm ready to try trusting my gut." Imani smiled. "Your gut has good instincts when you listen to it." He smiled back, a real smile. "I'll try to listen to it more often." The next few weeks transformed the Harding household. Felix, having finally broken his silence, couldn't seem to stop talking. He narrated his entire day, asked endless questions, and laughed. The sound of Felix's laughter echoing through the mansion made the staff smile and made Silas stop whatever he was doing just to listen. Imani moved into a suite on the 2nd floor, 3 doors down from Felix's room. They spent mornings in the garden hunting for rocks and leaves. Afternoons were for reading, with Felix choosing the books. Evenings were for quiet time, where Felix could talk or not talk, depending on how he felt. Miss Johansson was gone by the end of the first week, replaced by no one. Silas made the radical decision to reduce Felix's therapy schedule from 5 days a week to 2. Without the pressure of constant intervention, Felix began to heal at his own pace. But the transformation wasn't just in Felix. Silas started coming home earlier, joining them for dinner. He learned to sit on the floor and play with rocks without checking his phone. He discovered that his son had a wicked sense of humor and a talent for drawing, and he found himself watching Imani more than was strictly professional, noticing the way she threw her head back when she laughed, the patience in her hands, the quiet strength she brought to every interaction. Imani noticed him watching, but she wasn't sure what to make of it. The fact that Felix had brought them together didn't change the vast gulf between their lives, except it did, bit by bit. It changed when Silas sought out her opinion on school decisions, genuinely listening. It changed when he started asking about her day, about her mother's health. It changed the night Imani found him in the library at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, and instead of retreating, she sat with him, and they talked until dawn about loss and grief, and learning to live with scars that never quite healed. "What was your wife like?" Imani asked, as the first light crept through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and pink. The exhaustion of staying up all night had stripped away their usual defenses, leaving them raw and honest in a way daylight rarely allowed. Silas smiled, sad but genuine. Elena was light. She made everything brighter just by being in the room. She was a painter, really talented. Not professionally. She never wanted to deal with galleries or shows, but she painted constantly. She saw beauty in everything. She'd stop the car to photograph rust patterns on old buildings or collect wildflowers from the side of the road. Felix gets his eye for small, beautiful things from her. That's where the rock collecting comes from, too. She used to do the same thing. How did you meet? At a charity gala, of all cliches. I was there for business, hating every minute of it, counting down until I could leave without offending anyone important. She was there because her art was being auctioned for the charity. She'd had 3 glasses of champagne and told me my tie was boring and my smile was fake. Silas laughed softly at the memory. Then she challenged me to leave with her and go get real food, by which she meant hot dogs from a street cart. I was so used to people trying to impress me, wanting to talk business or make connections, that her complete lack of interest in my money or status was absolutely intoxicating. We ate hot dogs in the rain and talked about everything except what I did for a living. I fell in love with her that night. She sounds wonderful. She was. Silas stared at his hands, silent for a moment. And I failed her. I was supposed to be there that night, you know. We'd planned to go to Felix's school event together, but I had a meeting that ran late. I chose work over my family, so she took him alone. And then, if I'd been there, if I'd been driving instead of her, maybe things would have been different. Maybe she'd still be alive. You don't know that, Imani said gently. You can't live in the maybe. Do you know how many nights I've replayed that decision? But Felix was in the car too. And he survived. If things had been different, maybe you both would have died. Or maybe you'd have died, and Elena would be sitting here torturing herself. You can't know. All you can do is be here now for the son who needs you. He was quiet for a long moment. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just someone who's also made hard choices. What hard choices have you made? Imani hesitated. I had a daughter, she said quietly, the words coming easier in the pre-dawn stillness. Zara. She died when she was 3. Meningitis. One day she was perfectly healthy, running around, laughing at everything, singing these little made-up songs. 3 days later, she was gone. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done, that it was one of those terrible random things. Lightning strikes, they called it. Just awful luck. But I was her mother. I was supposed to protect her from everything, and I couldn't protect her from this. I couldn't even see it coming. Imani, I'm so sorry. I don't tell people because I can't handle the pity, the way they look at you when they know. Like you're breakable. Like mentioning your child's name might shatter you. She took a shaky breath. After Zara died, I couldn't go back to teaching. Being around children her age was too painful. Every 3-year-old I saw was a reminder of everything she'd never get to be. So I took whatever work I could find, cleaning houses, filing papers, anything that kept me busy and let me help my mother with her medical bills. At least that was something I could control, something I could fix. When I saw your job posting, I thought I'd be cleaning a house, staying invisible, keeping my head down, not finding another child who needed me. Or maybe I needed him. Silas reached across and took her hand. For what it's worth, I think Zara would be proud of you. You've taken your grief and used it to help another child heal. That's not nothing. That's everything. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. But feelings, once acknowledged internally, are hard to ignore. Over the following weeks, the tension between Silas and Imani became obvious to everyone. James watched them circle each other with barely concealed amusement. The breaking point came 6 weeks after Felix first spoke. Silas had a business dinner. He came home at 10 to find Imani in Felix's room, sitting beside his bed, holding his hand, while Felix thrashed through a nightmare. She was humming that gospel song, and as Silas watched from the doorway, Felix began to calm. Imani nearly jumped when she turned and saw Silas. How long have you been standing there? Long enough. Does he have nightmares often? 2 or 3 times a week, usually about the accident. Tonight it was bad. I didn't know. I thought with him talking now, maybe the nightmares had stopped. They're getting less frequent. This was the first really bad one in over a week. You're good with him. Better than anyone I've ever seen. I just care about him. That's the gift, caring. They stood in the dim hallway, close enough that Imani could smell his cologne mixed with the rain. "I need to tell you something," Silas said, his voice low and serious. "And I need you to let me finish before you respond. Because if I don't say this now, I might not get the courage again. I've been trying to find the right time, the right words. But there is no right time for something like this. Mr. Harding, Silas, please, we've been living in the same house for 6 weeks, raising a child together. I think we can use first names." Imani nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "Silas," he took a breath, gathering his thoughts. "When you came into our lives, I thought you were just another person passing through. Someone who'd stay a few weeks, maybe a few months, before moving on to something better. But you've become something I never expected. You're not just Felix's companion. You're part of our family now, part of our lives in ways I didn't know were possible. And somewhere in the last 6 weeks, I've realized that I don't want you here just for Felix. I want you here for me too. I want to come home and find you in the garden. I want to ask about your day and actually care about the answer. I want you." Imani's heart was pounding. "Silas, we can't." "Why not?" "Because I work for you. Because there's a power imbalance. Because I'm black and you're white and you live in a mansion and I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment. Because a million reasons. Are any of those reasons that you don't feel something too? If you genuinely don't feel anything, tell me, and I'll never mention this again. But if you do, of course I feel something. How could I not? You're brilliant and complicated, and you love your son with an intensity that takes my breath away. But feeling something doesn't mean we should act on it. What about Felix? What happens if this goes wrong and I have to leave? He's finally healing. I won't risk undoing that progress. Then we don't let it go wrong. We're both adults who've been through hell and survived. Surely we can handle a relationship." "No," Imani said firmly. "I can't risk Felix's well-being. I won't." She walked away before Silas could respond. The next few days were awkward. Then Imani's mother called. She needed surgery, and the costs were mounting. Imani did math that wouldn't work. She needed to ask Silas for a raise. She found him that evening. "I need to talk to you about my salary. Are we not paying you fairly?" "You're paying me very well. But my mother needs surgery. And even with what you're paying me, it's not quite enough. I was wondering if there might be room for a raise." "How much do you need?" Imani told him the number. His face remained impassive. "I can advance you the money." "A loan against your salary?" "No, I don't take loans. My grandmother had a saying about owing money to people who have power over your life. Then consider it a gift. That's even worse, because then I'd owe you something I could never repay. Don't you see how that complicates everything?" Silas stood up. "Let me help. Please. Because it makes me dependent on you. Because I need to be able to walk away if I need to, and I can't do that if I'm indebted to you." "Is that what you want? To walk away?" "I don't know. All I know is that I came here to clean houses, and somehow I've ended up caring for a child I adore, and falling for a man I have no business falling for, and my mother is sick, and I don't know how to fix any of it." Silas pulled her into his arms before he could stop himself, and Imani let him. She stood there breathing in his scent while he held her. After a long moment, he spoke into her hair. "What if we reframe this? Not a loan, not a gift. What if I hire you as Felix's official guardian? We'd draw up legal papers making you responsible for his care in partnership with me. It would come with a substantial salary increase. You'd earn the money for your mother's surgery, and I'd have the peace of mind knowing that Felix has someone who loves him watching over him. You'd really do that? Give me legal guardianship of your son? If something happened to me tomorrow, yes, I'd want you to be the one raising Felix. You're the only person I trust with him completely. What if things go wrong between us personally? Then we figure it out like adults. But Imani, I don't think it's going to go wrong. I think we could be something extraordinary if you'd let us try." Imani looked at him, this complicated man who'd started as her employer. She thought about her grandmother's warnings, but also about her grandmother's other saying, that love doesn't follow rules or make sense. It just is. Okay, she whispered. Okay, let's try. Silas smiled, really smiled, and Imani's breath caught. Then he kissed her, gentle and careful. When they pulled apart, Imani was crying. Happy tears. Felix is going to have opinions about this. Silas grinned. He's been asking me for weeks when I'm going to tell you I love you. 6-year-olds are more emotionally intelligent than 38-year-old CEOs. You love me? Is that okay? I love you too, just so you know. It matters, Silas said, pulling her close again. It matters more than anything. The next morning, Felix came bouncing into breakfast to find Silas and Imani sitting close together, Silas's hand covering hers. He stopped, looked at them, and his face split into the biggest smile. Finally. I've been waiting forever for you two to figure it out. You knew? Imani asked, laughing. I'm 6, not stupid. Daddy looks at you like you're magic, and you look at him like he hung the moon. It was super obvious. So, you're okay with this? Silas asked. Felix rolled his eyes. Daddy, I already told Imani she should be my new mom. Weeks ago. When? During quiet time. I asked if she'd stay forever and be my family. She said she'd have to talk to you, but I knew you'd say yes. You're not as scary as you pretend to be. Silas made a choking sound. Imani burst out laughing. Felix climbed into his chair. So when's the wedding? The wedding happened 6 months later. Not because Felix pushed for it, though he did frequently and with increasing creativity in his arguments, but because both Silas and Imani realized that what they had was real and lasting and worth celebrating. They kept it small, just James and Imani's mother, and a handful of close friends who'd become like family over the months. The ceremony was held in the garden where Felix and Imani had first sat together, where he'd given her that first stone. It seemed fitting to begin this new chapter in the place where everything had changed. Felix served as best man and took the job very seriously. He wore a tiny tuxedo that made him look impossibly grown up, and he held the rings with the same careful attention he gave to his rock collection. His speech about love and rocks had everyone crying and laughing at the same time, especially when he explained that relationships were like his favorite stones. They got more beautiful, the longer you held on to them. Imani wore a simple cream dress and carried wildflowers that Felix had helped her pick that morning. When Silas saw her walking toward him down the garden path, his eyes filled with tears. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that. She was his. She was Felix's. She was family. The vows they wrote were about more than just loving each other. They were about choosing each other every day, about building a life from broken pieces, about honoring the people they'd lost while making room for new joy. Felix added his own promise. I promise to keep collecting rocks and to share them with both of you. Because good things should be shared, and you're both really good things. Later, Imani's mother pulled her aside. You did good, baby girl. Not just with finding a good man, but with trusting yourself. I'm so proud of you. Mama, I thought I'd never feel whole again after losing Zara. You're never whole after losing a child. But you learn to live with the whole, and sometimes you find people who help make the weight bearable. Felix doesn't replace Zara, but he fills a different space in your heart, and that's okay. Across the garden, Silas was showing Felix how to tie his tie, both laughing. Imani watched them, her husband and her son, and felt peace settle in her chest. That night, under the stars, Silas pulled her close, swaying to music only they could hear. Felix told me something today. He said that when his mom died, he thought all the light went out of the world. But then you came, and you brought the light back. Not the same light, but a different one. Equally bright. Imani's throat tightened. That's... I know. He's wiser than both of us. I never thought I'd have this again. A family. A future. You. Neither did I. After Elena died, I thought that was it. One great love per lifetime. I never imagined there could be room for something new. But here we are, building something beautiful from broken pieces. The next few years were filled with the beautiful mundane chaos of family life. Felix thrived, becoming a confident, joyful child who still loved rocks, but also discovered a passion for painting and storytelling. His therapy became something he did occasionally, just check-ins to make sure he was processing things healthily. Silas loosened his grip on control, leaving work early to catch Felix's school plays and art shows. He discovered that success wasn't about empire building. It was about building a life worth living. Imani finished her degree, studying child development formally. She started a small private practice helping traumatized children heal through connection, rather than just intervention. Her approach became known for its compassion and effectiveness, and through it all, the three of them collected rocks together. They had jars of them now, organized by color and size and special meaning. Each one a memory, a moment, a small, beautiful thing that proved life was still worth celebrating. On Felix's 10th birthday, they took a trip to the coast, something they did every year now. It had become their tradition, their way of marking time and celebrating how far they'd come. The ocean was calm that day, the sun breaking through clouds in dramatic rays that made the water sparkle like diamonds. As they walked the beach hunting for stones worn smooth by water and time, Felix ran ahead with the boundless energy of a child who knew he was loved and safe. Then he stopped, knelt down, and picked something up. He examined it carefully in his hands, turning it over and over, and then his face lit up with the kind of joy that still made Silas's chest tighten with gratitude. Felix turned back to his parents with a huge smile that showed the gap where his front tooth had been. "Hey, I found the perfect one. Come see." Silas and Imani jogged to catch up, hands linked, moving together like they'd been doing this forever. Felix stood waiting for them, practically bouncing with excitement. He held out a stone that was half dark gray, half golden brown, the two colors swirled together in a perfect union, marbled and beautiful, and unique. "Look," Felix said, holding it up to the light where the sun made it glow. "It's like us. Different colors that became one thing. It's two things that look like they shouldn't go together, but they make something even better. Better together." Silas pulled his son into a hug, then extended his arm to include Imani. She joined them, the three of them standing there on the beach, waves crashing behind them, holding each other and one perfect stone. "You're right," Silas said, his voice thick. "We are better together." "Always," Imani added. "Forever," Felix finished. And there, on that beach, with the stone that symbolized their blended family warm in Felix's palm, they stood together. Not perfect, because no family ever is, but whole in the way that matters most. Complete, loved, home.